Shanti, good evening. Welcome to Interview with a Raj Yogi. And our topic this evening is spiritual integrity. But as usual, we'll start with a short reflection. Allowing the body to be seated comfortably, peacefully. I immediately turn my attention inwards. I think about the spine of the body. Whatever forces are playing on it, gravity, motion, instability, its objective is to maintain its natural shape and alignment. This allows for healthy movement, healthy activity as the body goes through the day. What if there is also a spiritual spine of the soul? It's not a physical thing, but the sense of a strong core, a healthy alignment that could be described almost as a state of peace. Whatever forces are working on me, the soul, as I go through the day, able to maintain that peaceful state, that peaceful alignment, a healthy way to go through the day. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti, and welcome to Interview with Raj Yogi. Tonight's topic is spiritual integrity. And so, actually, another name for this topic is detachment. But we know that this word detachment is a loaded word. And there's always questions that come up with it, challenges that souls have about this topic. So it's not that it's changing the words makes any difference, but perhaps maybe helps souls be able to see that they can actually identify with this. So I actually remember you had shared in one of the interviews, that its detachment is basically integrity. Could you clarify that?
Yeah, a word that we sometimes use with detachment is the word freedom. And the amount of freedom one needs to remain intact is what we're looking at, to the freedom in terms of not free from being influenced or affected. So when I'm influenced or affected, what's ever happening outside, external stimuli, shapes how I react. So I might even react out of nature, if you will. So I'm not really intact, I'm affected. But if there is that freedom to not be affected, that freedom to respond from the authentic self, then this is what we mean by detachment. So that freedom to remain intact.
This is your difference between just, and then we're not talking about semantics, but again, these are aspects of the course of Raj Yoga, which is the foundation of what we study here. But why say spiritual integrity? I mean, we use the word integrity.
You know, I had an interesting conversation with a soul today. They had a challenging interaction with a close relative, and they were sort of having a chit-chat, if you will, with God. You know, God, what do you want me to learn in this situation? What should I do? And one thought that they were reflecting on is, are you telling me to create some boundaries? And I find this word boundaries very interesting. It really is, boundaries is sort of, when I don't have integrity, I rely on boundaries. So again, I'm trying to remain intact, I'm trying to remain peaceful, if you will, I'm trying to remain okay, and I'm sort of trying to create something external to do that rather than having that inner strength or integrity. You know, that word grit is integrity, to be able to do that. So that I don't require boundaries. Nothing is going to take away that strength of spirituality, that sense of peace.
Is there something wrong with boundaries? Because it's used a lot, especially in in different professions.
I think it's nice to reflect on what is trying to be achieved through boundaries, you know, and to really reflect on are the boundaries taking away the opportunity for me to cultivate something internally? Because I'm going to have to, when we see on the physical state what happens when a country decides they're going to create boundaries, and then they have to create more, and then they have to create the boundaries for the boundaries and the reinforcement, and it just gets incredibly expensive and expensive. So to really look at what is the objective of creating boundaries, again, the idea that others can't attack me, that others can't take something from me, and that leads to the question, wow, do others have that much control over me?
So would you say then it's more about, let's using not a country, but just one's own personal self and boundaries, it's more of a concern of, am I just easily influenced?
Yeah, so that's where we come back to the detachment, that freedom from being influenced, a master of the self. Others will do, of course, what they need to do, and I don't need to really go deeply into that. It's not about condescension or judgment or anything like this, but about cultivating my own inner resilience and strength.
Now, I'm sure that just what you just shared might actually be, my next question be a little redundant then, about just trying to move away from situations then.
Yeah, so this is, of course, the idea of the rejection. Spirituality teaches us that, quite frankly, whatever is going on outside is more a creation of what's happening inside of me than anything arbitrary, if you will. So we tend to kind of move through the day with the consciousness of this happened to me and that happened to me, and I was just going along doing my own business and these things happened to me. But spirituality suggests that whatever is going out is not arbitrary. On out there is not arbitrary, but has something to do, in some way, if you will, I've almost created it. So, you know, this idea that to move away from something that I find challenging or averse of, I can do that, but I will recreate that same thing wherever I go, because whatever's happening is in some ways a connection to what's going on inside of me.
So in a way, does sort of creating boundaries sort of like a non-sustainable Band-Aid?
I think so, you know. Again, it depends whether or not really one is accepting this idea that it's a bit like I'm creating boundaries and I'm kind of locking the problem inside with me, if you will. So I can create the boundaries, etc., but the problem is still kind of there. So it will come up again in some other form. So I'm not really going to reach that objective.
So what happens if someone is spiritually healthy? How does that change where there isn't then this propensity to have boundaries?
it's very interesting, and we saw this with the senior students, is boundaries have this feeling of I don't want anyone to take anything from me, to strip anything from me. And what we discover is that we actually are, when we're spiritually depleted, we're actually, each of us are in big taking mode. So we expect a lot from other people, and we're very concerned that they're going to take things from us. Whereas when one is spiritually healthy, they're in giving mode. They're very full and healthy. No one can take anything from them, and they can give. So it's almost the exact opposite. So boundaries kind of keeps us stuck in this unhealthy place. Whereas when one's spiritually healthy, they're kind of overflowing. No one can take anything from them, but quite the contrary, they will give something to others. So someone might come along, I always enjoy this, I think it was Michael J. Fox, this idea, but it was based on the Eleanor Roosevelt kind of quote about, no one can take away my self-respect without my permission. And so that when I have a really strong sense of self-respect, that's just untouchable, really. And some might say, is that not arrogance? No, we would call it arrogance if it was arrogance. So if I have a strong sense of self-respect, no one can take that from me. But what that means is now, if someone is doing anything, I'm able to give respect to that soul. So I'm actually freeing that soul from their bounds or bonds, if you will, rather than putting myself in boundaries or bonds to try and stay safe. I'm actually freeing other souls from their bonds.
Now, I know we had mentioned in the very beginning of the session that, this is really this aspect of detachment. Mm-hmm. So why use that word? It's not about semantics again, but that we have to go and talk about spiritual integrity. But is there a reason why? Is that an accurate word?
It is a good word. That's the whole answer. Yes, it is an accurate word.
And why? Why?
I think that
because many find it's cold and disconnected.
Mm-hmm. So there's the two words. There's detached and attached. So if I was to say, that I enjoy Nora's company, but there are some strings attached. I only enjoy her company under certain conditions, when she's sitting to the right of me and when she's wearing a shawl. But if she was sitting on the other side and not wearing a shawl, I would not like her. So my liking, my connection has strings attached or conditions. So what we're suggesting, the opposite of attached, having those strings attached, those conditions, the opposite is detached. So whether Nora is sitting on my right or on my left, whether she has shawl or does not have shawl, really makes no difference. I would like her either way. I know it's a silly example, but not really, because regrettably that is where we've gotten to, where we're extremely selective and conditional. Even though we say we really want unconditional love, no conditions, no strings attached. We have become very attached or conditional to things being a certain way for us to be okay. The opposite of attached is detached. So to be that loving, to be okay, under all circumstances, this is detached.
Mm-hmm. I remember quite one of the earlier Raja Yoga sessions where we did touch on this aspect of detachment. And what we plan to look at in the next few sessions is the impact of what detachment or spiritual integrity has in terms of my day-to-day life. But I remember you had shared in the beginning that it has a lot to do with what I'm detaching from, and that's maybe where this word has become loaded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in essence, when we explore it in the context of a spiritual practice like Raj Yoga, we are detaching from all that strips us of our dignity, all that moves us away from our authentic or pure self. We're detaching from that. Mm-hmm. So we're actually attaching or embracing the truth So I think of truth and detachment as extremely, extremely close in terms of what we're actually talking about. And we often refer to the opposite of truth as falsehood or illusion. So this is where attachments are actually a product of illusion or absence of truth, if you will. So, for example, to think that something, another person, that I can own another person. I could say my sibling or my husband or whatever as if I own them. That is, of course, an illusion. Doesn't mean that we can't have a relationship with people, but this attachment piece that, they are mine is a bit of an illusion. I don't think anyone wants to be anyone's property. We want to have relationships, but not bondages.
Now, this aspect of, you hear this, I mean, maybe we don't use that word attachment, but, and just using the example of, just certain professions where you would not treat your family member, for example. Does this have anything to do with attachment and detachment?
Certain professions where you would
You don't treat your own family members.
Because it's unprofessional?
Well, there's the whole thing of objectivity.
Right.
So what does that have to do with? Does it have to do with this attachment piece?
Yeah, I think that's the understanding in those circumstances.
Even though they don't use those words, it's interesting.
Someone once gave the example, and again, it's quite an extreme example, but I know that I have seen on many occasions, it happens a lot in the fitness industry, people injure themselves. So on many occasions I've seen EMS arrive at the scene, and they have this beautiful stage of detachment. So usefulness and detachment are very connected. So they arrive very clear, very objective, their skills are accessible because they're not overwhelmed by what they see, they're not affected by what they see, they're able to be useful. But the example was given is, what if EMS arrived at the scene and it was a relative who was in distress? Would they still have that clarity, that objectivity, that usefulness, or would they be emotionally affected? And I found it a very thought-provoking question. So it's, that capacity to remain in full, mastery of all of our strengths, capacities, qualities is what we're talking about when we say detachment. And yes, sometimes when it's something that I refer to as mine, whenever that attachment is there, it actually seems to shut down the full breadth of our capacities. We don't seem to quite operate at our highest potential.
Many do find that there's a lack of clarity in terms of the difference between love and attachment.
So love does allow us to operate at our full potential. Attachment does not. So with attachment, and the way we can understand these two is very simple. If it's really love, if I say I have a lot of love, then it will be equal for every human being on this planet. That's called love. It's coming from the inside. It has nothing to do with whether that person is nice to you or knows you. They could be a mass murderer, whatever the case. It's not conditional on anything. It's coming from a very pure state inside. True love, pure love, spiritual love is equal for because it's for the soul. It's equal. It's based on
innate
truth.
nature.
Yeah, it's our innate nature. Attachment would be selective. Again, those strings attached, those conditions and expectations. I love those who do X, Y, Z, who act a certain way. I can't love people who do this type of thing. So that's a very simple way to differentiate between the two.
No, it's a very sensitive one.
It's really loaded.
Yeah. Because then it makes those questions, then do I really actually really love someone? Sure, that I care for someone.
I think what's suggested is that and this is the beauty, it's a very hopeful thing when we talk about detachment this way, it's suggesting every human soul is, in its pure state, loving. Once we start to lose that sense of self, if you will, lose our spiritual identity, come into limitations, conditions, expectations, attachment, then we start to lose access to our innately loving nature. So it's suggesting every human soul is loving, but when we forget, come deeper and deeper into this external or physical sense of self, we lose that capacity. So there's the memory of love and the seeking of that pure love in every human soul. So it's not saying that souls aren't loving, they are, but we lose that capacity for that really pure love when we start to come into those limitations.
So, this word spiritual integrity, could you clarify a bit more about when there is attachment? How does that affect one's spiritual integrity?
I think anyone can really appreciate how this might work. That once we start to have these attachments, we start to make compromises in terms of our value system, if you will, our objectivity, how we'd like to function. So, if I heard a story today, and it was in our lesson this morning as well. But it was quite it was powerful to hear it echoed in real life. So in the lesson we had this morning, it talked about, that if the child of a judge breaks the law, then they must, be treated as anyone else would who had done the same thing. And of course we have a real life story that was happening here where the son of a police officer had gone into an attack, and it was actually the father himself who had to take the son in. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, wow, that's remarkable, to be the one that's actually, why have I totally forgotten? You are arresting your own son. And, the level of detachment that would be required to not compromise the principles, as a police officer, his duty, not that feeling of this is my son, so I can't do this, but he maintained his integrity as an upholder of the law, and so arrested his son. I found it a very fascinating story. Of course we can see the son was extremely destructive to himself and others, so the beneficial thing to do was to arrest him, to stop it. So he did what is most beneficial. But what was going through his mind? Was there any of that sense of, this is my son, how can I do this to my son? Which would compromise doing that which is beneficial. So there's a deep connection between that detachment and benevolence. Again, love. So I find that really, when there is attachment, we can see how it compromises our duty, our core values, etc. And I think, we call them little white lies or whatever. I think everyone can think about how that can happen easily.
It's just interesting you use this example because it's very clear in terms of if there's a law broken. Maybe it's not clear for some, but in terms of, that is what he has been sworn into. But when it comes to then this internal aspect of, there should be certain things that we really don't do to ourselves, like have a lack of an elevated vision of ourselves. That's just one, that we would really, just be clear about our own personal values, but of course not. That isn't at the expense of others, and what would that even mean? That's another topic in itself. But it seems like it's quite gray in terms of what it means to compromise yourself versus that you're just trying to accommodate others.
Yeah, and I think that's where spirituality really tries to support us. We have a capacity called the intellect, which can hopefully see clearly and honestly what I'm up to. And again, attachment really compromises the intellect, the capacity to see clearly. So spirituality helps us to sharpen or restore our intellect so we can see ourselves a little bit more honestly and honorably. And that would help us to kind of navigate through those gray areas. Am I compromising myself? What's really going on here, to be able to see that clearly?
So I don't want to go into too much details, but just curious about this aspect, using the example of I'm compromising my self-respect, whatever that looks like. But because there's attachment, like, do you have any thoughts of what's exactly going on inside?
You know, I've always liked this idea that really the essence of integrity, or the seed of it, is self-respect. We call it soul consciousness and say, but really it's self-respect. Self-respect means my sense of personal value is completely intact and it's independent of anything external. So I understand my intrinsic worth as a spiritual being. It's got nothing to do with the things I do, the people I know, the things I have, my skills, nothing to do with that. It's just innate. This is self-respect. And so this is really, to me, a cornerstone of integrity, because the compromising, we're almost like business people as we go through the day in some way, and the compromising of integrity seems to be coming around value issues. So I am willing to, gray things, or, kind of fudge things a little bit if it means that my sense of value remains intact. Now, if I have self-respect, then I don't need to do that. I'm liberated from doing that. But if my sense of value is based on the external, we call this ego, I can suddenly find myself doing some very interesting things. When it comes to personal value, that can really turn things sideways, distort things very easily, and lead to compromise. We see this is a symbol, of course, we see this happening in business, right? So that there's such a difficulty for many to trust, because we just don't know if the intentions are honorable. When it comes to business, we feel, well, they just want to make a profit, they just want to increase the value of the company. Well, in this case, the business is the self. What would I do to increase the value of the self? If I don't have self-respect, we can do some very interesting things to try and increase the value of the self. And it's understandable, but it is kind of compromising my integrity and also compromising my conscience.
Would you say that if there are certain signs, like I'm feeling heavy inside and
rationalizing is a huge one.
Drained, that there is some sort of compromise happening?
Yeah, I think there's like part of it draining and the heaviness is because I'm thinking so much, right? I'm really weaving this whole tale inside my head to try and work around. I've got this biting conscience and I'm just trying to create a bunch of noise to override it. Rationalization is huge. It's how ego works. So there'll be a lot of thinking going on that just makes the soul heavy.
It's just interesting how that, with that rationalization, I'm not sure if souls really realize it at the time that that's what's happening.
The same soul we spoke about earlier, Daddy Janki, used to talk so much on this topic. And indirectly, it's really what she was talking about. She talked about honesty, but again, this is deeply connected to integrity. She talked about self-respect, but a clean heart. One who has integrity has a clean heart. Their intentions are pure. And so that is the most valuable commodity. And one of the most valuable commodities one can have. It goes with the self-respect, it goes with the integrity, it goes with the detachment, that freedom to be the self. So to have a clean heart. But when something isn't clean, there's a lot of noise inside.
It's interesting. It's either this feeling that I don't want to be affected, but then it's like, hey, I'm entitled. Hey, I'm putting boundaries. I have a right to it. And like there could be possibly something that's driving on a deeper level, but without spirituality, it looks like as if they're two separate things, but it seems like it's actually the same thing.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that idea that when we're spiritually impoverished, we are expecting so much, a sense of rights, but we're also very worried about others taking from us. So it's this kind of state that we come into when we are spiritually impoverished, right? We just, rather than putting ourselves right or being concerned, am I operating in a proper way, we try and demand rights.
So we do want to continue this next week, because I'll also invite, if souls have any questions, to feel free to type into the chat box on Instagram or also on YouTube. Just let us know. As well as if you have topics you'd like to share, to let us know as well through the chat box or through email. But in terms of this aspect, how does understanding help when it comes to that there's, okay, I'm attached. I don't even know if I can recognize it, but how does knowledge, there is a framework of knowledge in this study.
I think, if we're saying that truth, embracing, we could use the word attaching, but embracing truth is going to really liberate me from attachments into a more healthy state of operating, then it's obviously that's what I want to understand, is the truth. I really want to, and we say these are basically understanding eternal aspects. And we're also going to need power. We always think of someone with integrity as being one with quite a bit of personal power. When we say power, we don't mean over others or anything like this, but the power to, and that's why that symbol of that spine with core stability really intrigued me. To me, it's a symbol of integrity. We say, they've got a spine, right? That they have integrity. That I want to know the proper alignment. I want the knowledge of the proper alignment. And whether it's the physical spine or the spiritual alignment, the truth. What is my true state of operating? I want to know that. And it's very easy, quite frankly. We just look at the things that we expect from other people. Right? So what we demand of other people in terms of how they should treat us is, Nora must love me no matter what I do. Right? Nora must be nice to me all the time. So these are our innate states, that we are loving all the time. We are kind all the time. That's our innate state. But since we lost it, we're in taking mode, and we expect other people to do that for us. But it's actually our innate state. So this is the truth about myself. I want to remember that. And then I'm also going to need a source of power. It's one thing to know something, but it's extremely frustrating if I know something but I'm not able to operate in a way that honors what I know.
Absolutely.
It's very frustrating. So I'm going to need power as well.
It's interesting. I think I know we're coming close to the end of the session, but I was thinking about, is it possible that, because there's this aspect of, in the study called being a detached observer, ironically, there's that you're, as if you have to be a witness to all the stuff that's going on inside of you. Is it possible to be a witness to these habits going on inside, even though these habits are like really strong? And I don't know of how much we really recognize attachment as being a habit, but when there seems to be certain expectations or dependencies, or you're fixated on something, but you can't seem to help yourself, but to actually just watch yourself and not actually try to force any sense of change.
I think that's the beauty of at least what Raj Yoga tries to teach, is it really invites us to cultivate, if you will, faith in the self, so that we're actually able to watch ourselves engaging for the 100th time in the same addictive, strange behavior, and still be able to say, but I know that's not me. I know who I really am now. I understand that that's a deep-rooted behavior pattern. It's been there over a long period of time, but I now know who I really am. That's something very central to Raj Yoga, it's really what the whole study is based on, is the question, who am I? So getting a very strong sense, and we get that sense really through this experience of being a child of God, but getting a very strong sense of who I am. So now I have a contrast. I have some place to stand. I'm now standing in the sense of who I am as I observe these different behaviors of what I had become when I forgot myself, what I became. So I'm an observer of that. It's kind of an interesting thing. It's like, okay, I'm not ignoring it or rejecting it. I'm aware it's happening. But I also know who I really am, what I'm really, that deep faith in the self and our intrinsic good.
Would you say being an observer also takes power too, though?
It does. There's of course power of the information. I mean, this is very enlightening, this kind of approach. But we call it a power of purity, this capacity to remain stable in that stage of not being affected while things are happening. It really, it's the accumulation of this core strength, if you will.
Well, that's hopeful.
It's all very hopeful.
I think maybe sometimes that knee-jerk reaction, I see something I don't like inside. Stop, I don't want to have these feelings, I want to have these thoughts. Mm-hmm. But it's hopeful, and we will touch on that next week, is how do I build that power?
Yeah, I just want to finish by saying that, love has a remarkable way to melt things. And so when I notice a behavior inside of myself, when we try and punish, we need to discipline, of course, we need to be aware of what's going on, but when we try and push it down or oppress it or punish it, it's really not it. Well, we say it's, have you really addressed the thing completely? We say burnt it. That's not going to do it. It's actually going to come back bigger and stronger. So, but when we have this understanding and this very compassionate almost vision, this very understanding, this very loving, it actually melts it. It's far more effective. So I was laughing the other day. I'll end with a story. So I was in a workshop, and it was about breathing. The whole thing was on breathing and different kinds of breathing techniques. It was fascinating. And one of them was the lion. It's called the lion breathing exercise. It's used in yoga classes. Some of you might know. So you take a deep breath in, and then, I'm not going to do it because it will frighten you, but you open your eyes wide and your tongue comes out and you make this like lion noise and this extreme. And I was watching, we were all doing it in the room. I mean, everyone was great. But I thought, and so I finally had to share, we all look like Kali, and I was explaining. It looks exactly like this goddess Kali, the tongue's hanging out, these eyes. And I was explaining that this is this goddess who has this incredible power of honesty and zero tolerance for anything. She is integrity. Zero tolerance for anything that degrades the self. And that kind of... and so she's shown with an incredibly frightening form. And I think this is based on this other approach to try and address the self, which is, I'm going to kill it, I'm going to kill that ego, I'm going to crunch it, I'm going to crush it, I'm going to, and just this crazy, violent approach towards the self that we wouldn't want to use on anyone. And it just doesn't work. It comes back bigger. But what Kali actually is, this incredible power of detachment, is loving. Tremendous depth of understanding is what she represents. Incredible depth of understanding, an incredible accumulation of truth in the soul that's just so compassionate, can melt that which degrades the self.
Well, thank you. This aspect of power and capacity with respect to attachment and detachment, we'd like to examine that a bit more next week. The how piece, I feel the souls are very attracted to them, but how? How do I do that? And so thank you for those who've joined, and Judy for your sharing. We'll have a little reflection right now.
whatever my spiritual practice or journey of reflection is, it's so worthwhile to create a space inside, a safe zone, where there are no thoughts of the outside world. Don't think about roles, responsibilities, or any of that. It's a sacred space inside where I can let go of the unnecessary, focus on what really matters, dedicate that space to just exploring who I am. It takes a while sometimes to build that space inside, but such a worthwhile investment of my time. And so I go inside now. When I start, there might be so many thoughts, habituated thoughts, things I need to do, worldly things, or even doubts, not sure what I'm doing. They're all there. I observe them all. But I don't let them enter deep into the heart. I don't entertain them. And they begin to fade away. I'm not rejecting them or judging them, just not entertaining them. I know they will come, and I know they will go if I don't engage. My focus is on going deep inside, starting to build that quiet, sacred space, like an inner meditation room. Very simple, very peaceful, where I can listen, creating a space that begins to invite the truth, what is eternal, who am I? Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. Thank you again for joining with us. You're welcome to join us again next week as we continue this conversation about detachment. But in terms of that aspect of how do I gain that power to keep that spiritual integrity? And so we have a workshop coming up.
We do.
And I'll let Judy tell us about it.
I think Nora should tell us about it.
Because I'm going to take care of the IT.
I have no idea about what's going on.
Just stop it.
Okay. Oh. I think it's the authentic self. And I think it's on the Sunday, the 31st. And I think it's at 5 o'clock p.m. And I think it is on Zoom and YouTube. Yeah. And I think it's on our website. So I could be wrong on all of those thoughts, but I would definitely suggest, if you want to join this workshop about the authentic self within, go to our website to get the details on when it is, what date, time, and how to join. It's an online session, so that's coming. Our drop-in sessions continue Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday evening. Sunday's a full hour. And, of course, our Soul Cafe is Saturday afternoons, 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock p.m. Again, all the details can be found on our website, and we're really happy that you found us for this session. So thank you for joining. Until next time, Om Shanti.